Sister Clare Crockett, servant sister of the home of the mother, alone with Christ alone. Preface, written by Sister Kristen Gardner, Sisters of the Home of the Mother, September the 8th, 2020. 2 years before Sister Clare's death, the servant sisters of the Home of the Mother were preparing a book with the vocation stories of about a dozen sisters. Sister Clare was asked to write her story and choose to introduce herself with a funny narrative. How better to begin this book than with that very story? She says, "When I was 16, a famous hypnotist came to my city. I had seen him on other occasions in past years and I really enjoyed his show. I wanted him to hypnotise me too. Before the show started, the hypnotist told us that only certain people with a certain mental state could be hypnotised. Then he told the audience, there were about 800 people, to do a simple hand exercise, and at the end of this exercise, those with their hands interlocked could go up on stage, because they were the ones who could be hypnotised. I was with a group of friends in one of the first rows of the theatre. None of their hands had remained interlocked. Mine had not either, but I pretended as if they were stuck together. All of my friends started shouting, 'Go up on stage, Claire, he's going to hypnotise you.' I went up along with about 30 other people. We got in a row facing the public. The hypnotist came up to each one of us and touched our foreheads with the palm of his hand, saying in a deep voice, 'Relax.' I saw how some of them fell into the chair that had been placed behind them in anticipation of this reaction. The hypnotist sent those who didn't fall back to their places, while the audience gave them a compassionate applause, seeing how they would not be hypnotised. Then it was my turn. He did exactly the same thing to me, and I fell into the chair behind me. I'm completely conscious, I thought. I don't feel hypnotised. And the truth was, I was not hypnotised. On the count of 3, the hypnotiser told us to open our eyes, but that we would still be under the effect of I do not remember what thing. With his back turned to the audience, he winked at us, saying, 'So you know what you have to do.' None of us there on stage had been hypnotised. Either they were all actors, or they were people like myself, willing to play along with the show of this legendary hypnotist. The audience was completely convinced that we had been hypnotised, just as I had been convinced when I had been in the audience on previous occasions. The show reached its climax when Mr. Relax told us that he was going to give a gift to each one of us who had been hypnotised. Our gift was a leprechaun that only we could see and touch. Nobody else could. This leprechaun would be with us until noon the next day. When I came off stage, everybody started coming up to me to ask me questions about the leprechaun. What is he wearing? Does he have a beard? What's his name? Is he looking at me? Everybody believed me. I went home with my leprechaun, Dominic, and I took him to high school with me too. Even the strictest and toughest of my teachers ended up buying the story. A few years later, I was home with my family and a few friends of mine. We were all there together in the kitchen, like good Irish people, drinking our cup of tea and having one of those typical conversations that starts with the question, 'Remember when?' and is followed by a roar of laughter and knee-slapping. Seeing as we were all in such a good mood, I piped in saying, 'Remember when I pretended to be hypnotised and have a leprechaun?' Everyone stared at me and there was complete silence. 'Remember,' I repeated with a nervous laugh. 'No,' they responded, 'you really did have a leprechaun. But since you were hypnotised, you don't remember anymore. But you did. You had him in the palm of your hand.' Everyone started talking at once, trying to convince me that it had really happened. I tell this story because when I realised that God was calling me to the religious life, nobody could believe that God would call a girl like me. For many, it was impossible that I could have a vocation, yet somehow they could believe I had a leprechaun. Chesterton once said, 'When men choose not to believe in God, they then become capable of believing in anything.' What an amazing quote, and what a sad truth. God can call whomever he wants, whenever he wants, wherever he wants. Why? Because he is God. Our founder wrote a poem entitled "Why Me?" that says, "I will no longer ask, why me? I will simply recognise your freedom and give you thanks unceasingly." The truth is that I never thought of becoming a nun. I thought of becoming 100 other things, but never a nun. And now Sister Kristen says, nobody could believe that a God would call a girl like me, and yet God in his sovereign freedom did call her. Moved by his grace, she responded wholeheartedly and gave her life without reserve. This is the story that will be told in this book. Sister Clare and I met at the Home of the Mother at around the same time. We were very different. I come from a sheltered environment and was very studious. Clare was immersed in worldliness, but had experienced God's love for her and wanted to change. One of Clare's favourite amusements was trying to scandalise me by using curse words, which were then still part of her everyday vocabulary. To her surprise, my reaction was sometimes simply a blank expression, or the question, "Is that English?" She would roll on the floor laughing when she realised I had never heard those words before. Each of us had our own plans and dreams. She wanted to make it to Hollywood and I wanted to be an author. God broke into our lives and called us to leave everything behind for love of him. After struggles and doubts, we each offered him our talents, placing them entirely in his hands and letting him use us as he willed. On my 16th birthday, I entered as a candidate with the Servant Sisters. Clare, who was already a candidate, wrote me a song. In it, she jokingly affirmed that I had been born a saint, that I had slept on a bed of stones as penance ever since childhood, that I prayed 15 rosaries daily, and that I was a model for all the candidates. It was all an exaggeration, of course, but I do think she saw me as an ideal candidate for the religious life. Now, as I discover how far she surpassed me in her love for the Lord, I am filled with admiration and humbly lower my gaze. And why am I, of all the sisters, writing this book? Yes, I knew her personally, but not as well as the other sisters did. Yes, I had already collected a lot of information about her life when I edited the documentary All or Nothing, but I could have passed on this information to another sister. Let me explain. Back in 2012, as we were working together in the home of the Mother television studio, we found the recording of the moment Clare claimed at her first Holy Week encounter that she wanted to become a famous nun. I told Sister Clare I wanted to show everyone, but she was horrified. "Please, no, that has nothing to do with me. I was so superficial." I did end up showing it to the sisters, and we all had a laugh together. Sister Clare chuckled as well, but playfully reproached me with a furtive gaze. Her silent message was clear: "I'll get back at you someday." On April 16th, 2016, news of Sister Clare's tragic death spread quickly on television and in newspapers. After overcoming my initial pain and sorrow, I could not help but smile as I thought of Sister Clare's newfound fame and how embarrassing it would have been for her. She had long abandoned her dream of being famous, and yet, to this day, we receive phone calls and emails from people all over the world who want to share how much Sister Clare's story has helped them. Yes, I was amused, until the day I had to start writing her biography. I shook my head and thought, now she has really gotten back at me. We had both immolated our desires for the Lord, reaching the point where we no longer desired them at all, but rather the absolute contrary. And now our Lord has mysteriously fulfilled them both. This book is far from being a complete biography. Only 4 years have passed since Sister Clare's death, and there are yet many, many testimonies to be gathered. I hope, however, that it will permit all those who have heard about her death and watched the documentary All or Nothing to get to know her better. Even those who knew her personally will learn a lot about Sister Clare, just as I have. An example of this is the significance of the motto Father Raphael Alonso, our founder, gave her when she took perpetual vows: "Alone with Christ alone." When Father Raphael first announced it in 2010, and until recently, this motto was always a mystery to me. Sister Clare alone? It is true that she was the only sister to take vows that year, but of all the sisters, she was constantly surrounded by people. Her sense of humour, her vibrant stories, and her contagious joy made everyone want to be with her. Now, after listening to hours upon hours of interviews, after reading her spiritual notes and getting to know her interior life, I have started to understand what this phrase must have meant to her. When she encountered Christ crucified on that first Good Friday of the year 2000, she suddenly found herself alone before Christ, who himself was alone on the cross, suffering for love of her. In that instant, she was stripped of all her masks and her misery was revealed. Only Christ could show her who she truly was and how she could reach true happiness in him. Some have observed that in the documentary, Sister Clare seems to be a saint from the moment of her conversion on Good Friday. In this book, readers will discover the spiritual battles Sister Clare fought as the Lord transformed her progressively. Throughout her life as a servant sister, our Lord would continue to reveal to her, sometimes in solitude and darkness, who she was and who he was. Her encounters with Christ alone gave her the strength to generously surrender her entire self to him for the salvation of souls, especially those of young people, culminating finally in her definitive encounter with Christ alone. Now some practical details. Throughout the book, I frequently include fragments of Sister Clare's own writings. We have many letters from her, in addition to 6 notebooks she used throughout her 15 years as a servant sister during prayer, to copy notes from homilies or quotes from books she was reading, or simply to write down reflections. We have numbered these notebooks 1 to 6 in chronological order. The first notebook from her time as a candidate is almost entirely in English. As a novice, she began to change to Spanish, but with some Spanglish, randomly switching back and forth from English to Spanish, often in the middle of a sentence. After her profession, she spent 4 years in Jacksonville, Florida, and she began to write in English again. Once she returned to Spain in 2010, however, little by little, she spontaneously returned to the Spanish. In the English version of this book, I will include a note when the writings of Sister Clare have been translated from Spanish. If there is no note, the original was in English and the wording is Sister Clare's. Any bold print or underlines included in her writings are her own. Slight changes have been made in grammar and punctuation when necessary. So as to keep the text brief and free of interruptions, when quoting interviews of family members, friends, servant sisters, or others who knew Sister Clare, I omit the footnotes with the exact date of the interview I am citing. However, when quoting Sister Clare herself, I do include the origin and the date of the interview, video, or text. For biblical quotes, I use the Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. When there is a biblical quote in Sister Clare's own writings in English, the translation is usually from the New Jerusalem Bible, which is the version of the Bible she herself personally used. In any case, I leave the quote as she has written it. When translating from a Spanish quote of the Bible in her writings, I use the translation which is most similar to the original Spanish she is quoting. In Sister Clare's writings, she often cites books she was reading at the time. Although I have given bibliographical information for some of these citations, due to time constraints, not all of them have been located for this edition. I would like to give a special thanks to Sister Clare's family and friends in Derry for their help in this project and their availability to answer questions and give information about her childhood and youth. Thomas Gallagher's help was also irreplaceable as he hosted us during our stays in Derry and shared information on the history of the city and country. Those who met Sister Clare in the United States, Spain and Ecuador have duteously sent their memories. I ask all those who read this book to pray for them so that they also may be generous with the Lord as they learn from Sister Clare. The help, support and prayers of Father Raphael, Mother Anna, all the sisters, my own family and all those who have written to assure me of their prayers are what made this book possible and available so soon. All for the glory of God, as Sister Clare would say.